Hello, everyone, and welcome to the game of the day number 8 here at the Chessable Masters by Chess24. Today's game of the day, I picked a game between Alexander Grischuk and Anish Giri. It is the first game of the day for these two guys that I've done in this event so far, so I was looking forward to it. This is a pretty interesting game with some wild complications at the end that are a lot of fun, so I hope you will enjoy it. It was a bit of a must-win. It was a must-win game here for Grischuk, trailing in this match, also having lost the first set or mini match a couple of days ago. So he had to win today to try to tie this match. And so that may explain some of the decisions that are made in this opening and game, but it was a very interesting one. So it starts with e4, e5. Anish Giri has been talking up his course on the French defense, but in a lot of the games, he has played maybe the safer e4, e5. And here they play an Italian. Alexander Grischuk can play, of course, the Ruy Lopez, or he can play the Italian. The Italian has become just as popular as the Ruy Lopez in the last several years. Sort of the same, of course, it's the same pawn structure. And white typically gets a similar, really a similar setup as they do in the Ruy Lopez, but they are not. They're not forced to contend with the theory of the Marshall Gambit and the Berlin defense, which are both pretty tough nuts to crack from a theoretical standpoint. So yeah, players have been playing this a lot. Bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, d6. And, when I was a kid, let's say 20, 25 years ago, the way that white would normally play this position would be to play bishop b3, knight to d2, knight f1, sometimes h3. Sometimes you castle play rook e1 before playing knight f1. Sometimes you could try to do that right away. Now things have changed a little bit here, and white sometimes tries to play a4 first, which tries to say, I can play on both the king side and the queen side, and versus the Ruy Lopez where black normally gets space with a6, b5. Here, white has the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to play a4, stabilize things on this side, maybe even try to play for some kind of queenside play. And so that's one of the modern ways to play this position, is to play a4. But there's a lot of nuances with the move order here, which frankly go far beyond the analysis of this game. But there's questions of, should white play h3 first? Should they play knight d2 first? Should they play a4 first? Should they castle first? And all of these things have sort of their pros and cons. But some of the clear things, first of all, are that if you don't want to castle and play h3 when black hasn't castled, because then they'll play h6 and g5. And I talked about that a few days ago. But some of the other things, like, whether you want to play h3 first, or whether you want to play bishop g5 or knight d2 first, are really quite tricky. And when to play bishop b3, and but those are all things that if you decide to take up this opening, you can start to understand all these nuances. And I'll try to walk you through the ones in this game. But here, Alexander Grischuk plays bishop g5 right away. So it's an ambitious move because it pins the knight. It's a pin that's not easily broken because the bishop can't go back to e7 by jumping over the pawn. If they could, black would probably gladly play that move, but they cannot. So it's an ambitious move. At some point, white may be able to try to play d4. And so now that the knight is pinned, it's not attacking e4. But the one drawback of it is that it runs into h6, g5, after which the bishop is really on a pretty bad square on g3, right? So black can weaken his pawn structure and king side, but forces the bishop to g3, which is sort of an odd trade-off, and it's a complicated trade-off. If black has already castled, then it's a little bit different, right? So if we imagine, like, let's say instead of bishop g5, white played a4, let's, just for the sake of example, let's say a4, a5, and white plays, I don't know, h3, castles, bishop g5, or even castles bishop g5. Then if black plays g5 here, once they've castled, then they have to at least seriously consider the possibility that white could take here. And I'm not gonna go through the specifics of this position. This is actually quite playable. There's some theory. But the point is that when black is already castled, then g5 is quite risky. But in this position where Alexander here plays bishop g5 right away, neither side is castled, then g5 is a real option. But Anish Giri first plays a5, which is a flexible move, and I actually like this move. There's not a lot of games, by the way, already with this move order. There were some more games with g5, but the move a5 I like because it's a very flexible move. Anish is saying, I can play g5 later. Let's see, first of all, if he's going to castle. Let's see how he wants to develop his pieces, and I can probably play g5 later on. And I think that is a reasonable way to look at it. So knight d2. Bishop a7, that's sort of a always useful move because eventually, white will have threats to play d4, and so the bishop will not be under attack, which means that black will have more options then. So white plays h3, and now Anish plays g5. So again, he's weakening squares on the king side. However, the bishop gets to a pretty bad square, and it's tricky because he can't really castle here. Castling, at least, seems a little bit like it's kind of castling into it. White can probably play g4 there, try to play g5. And yeah, it doesn't seem like the best move. So if he's not going to play g5, it's not clear what he should do. Like maybe bishop e6, bishop d7, something like that. But g5 is the most natural move here. Bishop g3, castles. And it is somewhat surprising that castling is actually very normal after playing g5, as long as white doesn't have this sacrifice, because the king is fairly safe at least for the time being. And on the other hand, white's king is not really that safe on the king side. And we saw a game, I analyzed a game, I forget who was actually playing. But there was a game that we looked at a few days ago that was similar to this, and eventually white actually was able to bring their king to d1 and c2. But the king doesn't feel especially safe on the king side for white because of plans like king g7, knight h5, f5, things like that, with the bishop very nicely aiming here. Of course, not all is so rosy for black, as we'll see. So Alexander plays queen e2, king g7, and he castles long. And I actually rather like what he did here because I think this plan makes a lot of sense. With the pawn on g5, he's not committed to going on the king side. And now I actually think the way he plays made a whole lot of sense. So let's keep looking. Bishop d7. Now he plays bishop b5. And this is a nice move. The thing is, I think what black would do, why is he playing bishop b5? Well, let's see. If white plays, for example, knight to f1, I think the most logical plan for black is to play a4. And then the idea is to play knight a5, either followed by b5 or of course, taking that bishop, if possible, would be nice too. Knight f1 is a normal move to try to get to these squares. But I think bishop b5 is aimed against that move. So I rather like that move. Black plays queen e7. Bishop h2. Bishop h2 is sort of aimed against knight h5, which can happen at various points. Now, if knight h5, you would have potential tactics like moving, maybe playing h4, maybe moving the knight away. But just otherwise on knight h5, you'll probably have to play bishop h2 anyway. So black plays a4. Not too tempting for white to take this pawn. I know the computer considers it, but it seems like you're just opening up the file here. It seems kind of crazy, even though there's no immediate refutation of it. But Alexander plays a3, knight b8. Sort of normal to try to open up the queen side, but it's possible that it's a little bit slow. And that he could have tried, a more ambitious plan would be to play something like bishop to b6, or even bishop c5, actually. The idea is to play rook a5, so I'm trying to move the bishop to the best square. It's hard to know which one is better. C5 is natural because, you can play for b5. On the other hand, the bishop sometimes is a target, so it's a little tricky. But this was possible. He played knight b8, and now Alexander plays d4, which is very logical. The knight has left the center for a minute, and so he doesn't want to take and bring the knight right into the game. And by playing d4, he does he does attack the e5 pawn already 3 times. So it's a very logical move. It was also interesting though to take, not so much. Of course, it seems to not be ideal to give the knight a tempo. However, white does have a nice plan here of knight f1 followed by knight g3 or knight e3, and I still kind of like white's position here because as much as the white king seems a little bit odd on c1, well, I'm not sure that the black king seems any less odd. And you can see a position where white gets a knight to f5, then plays g4 and h4, and it could be game over for black potentially and something like that. So I actually think that despite the result of this game, that playing this way, that the treatment of the opening by Grischuk here was pretty interesting. So ED was played, and so he played d4 as mentioned instead of knight f1, cd, knight c6. Okay, so the position now gets very complicated, and if you're looking at it with the computer, I think the computer likes white, but it is a very tricky position for both sides to play. And here Alexander played e5, and that might be the start of where things went a little bit wrong for him. There were 2 moves that seemed to be pretty good. I looked at both of them. One was queen to d3, and e5 seems logical. It's just when you look at the game, it becomes clear that maybe it wasn't the best. But queen d3 is a solid move, and it's a bit of an odd square, but it's the only move that defends both of these pawns. So which d4 was under attack. And now it also clears the e-file, where next move we might be able to play something like rook to e1. So I think white is a little bit better here because the king still feels a little bit unsafe on g7. And white has simple plans again of playing rook e1, at some point playing for e5. So that was queen d3. Another move that was interesting is to play d5 instead of e5. And now that's a totally different kind of position. We get almost a Benoni-like structure. For example, some captures here, and then knight f1. Rather than knight f3, the knight is trying to get to f5. And so on bishop e5, we'll play knight e3. And on other squares, we'll probably play knight to g3. And again, I think this position is more pleasant for white. It's not over, especially as black has this kind of nice move f5 here. And it's still complicated. Something like rook e1, fe, knight e4, and with a game, but arguably the king on g7 is a little bit weak. So I think white is probably better. But Sasha here played e5, and after de, knight to d5. I'm not as in love with the position here because it just seems like the white king suddenly can get caught in in a bit of a firestorm of pieces here. The queen can come to c5, the bishop can come to f5, the knight can come to c3. There's a lot of little threats. So it's maybe not disastrous yet, but it seems a little bit riskier than it was in the other lines that we looked at. So the game continues here, knight to e4. Logical move. He defends the c3 square. It's obviously a great square for the knight. Bishop e6, very natural. He defends the knight on d5, which was attacked by the rook. Rook e1, again, a very natural move. Maybe, but that one, maybe it would have been, in hindsight, maybe it was safer to start playing king b1, getting the king away from danger. But still a natural move, a hard move to criticize, especially when they have to make moves pretty fast. Rook to d8, very logical. The rook to the open file. Queen c2. Now, queen c2 is the mistake. What should white have done here? It's still not an easy position to play from the white side, but maybe king b1, getting the king away, even though you are walking into a pin. But here white can break the pin by playing bishop d3, and it seems like maybe white is surviving this position, at least for the time being. I still don't love I don't love this pawn structure with the pawn now being on e5 because it just seems like it's hard to follow up. Like h4 is always met with g4, and that pawn, we almost would want to get rid of it in some cases to open up things like bishop takes c6, bishop e5 check, but our pawn is really blocking us, blocking our knight and blocking our bishop. But instead here, instead of king b1, Alexander plays queen to c2. And now this gives Anish a chance to play something really beautiful, and he jumps on it, plays knight c to b4. Awesome move. It's a move that you have to look at once you see the queen landing on c2. You just got to look at it, and then Anish had to have the courage to play it. First of all, because it's not like it wins by force or anything like that, but also the calculation, the calculation power to sort of make it work. So Sasha here takes it. There's not really, if you don't take it, you sort of suffer. Plus, you're not up a piece. So it makes a lot of sense. For example, if we play queen e2, I did look at it. The best move is c6, which starts to take advantage of this bishop being a little bit loose. And then on bishop c4, you can play b5. And if white is forced to play something like this, it's really, really ugly. Right now, the king is horrible. You've given up your good bishop. So it's a really bad position. So we can play something like bishop a4, but now knight a2 check, king b1, and knight to c3. Very nice. Again, this is about opening up the position at this point against the king. So either way, if white takes, or let's say take with a knight first, knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes a3. We have the battery here. We have the bishop coming to f5. It's just bad. We have potentially bishop a2 in some cases, or queen a2. I mean, namely on bishop c2, we have queen a2. Actually, we have bishop a2 here, which is even stronger with queen takes c3. But so, yeah. So the position here, you kind of have to take the piece and just hope that you find a defense. So he takes it. Knight takes. Rook takes d8. So rook takes d8 was actually not a bad attempt to sort of give material back. But if white was going to try to win this game, you would probably have to try something else like queen to e2 to, basically tell black, all right, I know this is extremely dangerous, but are you actually going to checkmate me? Because let's look also, queen b1 is the first move maybe you look at, try to keep the queen close. This one's a bad one because after knight a2, the king doesn't have the b1 square, and that's a big problem because this is actually checkmate. So, sorry. So if queen to e2, there's a few ways here for black to play. Well, really two ways. The first one, and I think the one that most of us would go for, is a3, which forces pawn takes. Rook takes d8 here does not work because we can actually play a2, which is very nice. But so we play, let's say b takes a3. And now, how does it go? I believe it's knight to a2. Yeah. King b2 doesn't work because of bishop d4 check. This is nice with queen takes a3. So we got to go king b1. And then the queen takes on a3. And this is clearly a very dangerous position. But, it remains sort of complicated after queen b2. I think black is better. Probably just keeps the queen's on, then wants to play knight b4. I mean, it's hard to believe that white is going to survive this, but it was possible to try it. And then another way to play, which is maybe a little bit more like a computer way to play, is to play knight a2, king b1, and queen b4. The computer loves this move. And what's odd about it is that it's actually a slower approach. Like white wants to play a3, but then they're not even really threatening to take on b2. But somehow the white pieces are just really stuck here. Like the knight doesn't have squares. This knight can't move because of knight c3. It's just a really tough position. There's ideas with bishop f5, all kinds of stuff here. So this was good. Ultimately, it is a good sacrifice for black, so wouldn't have changed the outcome. But Alexander here, Sasha plays rook takes d8, sacrifices the queen. Knight c2, rook a8, knight e1. But it's not ideal because in most of these positions, black is going to be up material, or at least not down any material, and the white king is still a problem. Here he did have a move to fight, which is a tough move to spot, but he could play knight to d2, and so if we count the material now, he's got rook and 4 pieces versus queen and 3 pieces. So he's got a rook and a piece, for the queen. And even though it's it still seems like it's very good for black. It's not totally over here. He could try to play on, um, because there are some traps here. Like, so if we play bishop d4, knight f6, for example, and suddenly we're threatening checkmate, right? So it's a little bit tricky. Um, Black does have some good moves here, but this is sort of beyond what we need to look at. But after knight takes e1, he took the knight back. Very natural, because for now he's actually up material. He's got rook and two pieces for the queen. But the problem is that after queen b4, black is literally attacking. It's attacking this. It's a triple threat here. And one of the big problems of this bishop on e2. Sorry, I made a crazy arrow here. The bishop on h2 is really bad. And so here it is just lost. He played knight to d3, queen to e takes knight on e4, rook a7, c6. The bishop has to take something. He played rook takes a4. Bishop takes a4 would be met with queen takes d3. So rook takes a4 is forced, but then queen takes g2 attacks this bishop, as well as the bishop on b5. So white is losing more material and is completely lost here. He's not going to be able to have much for the queen. So so yeah, very nice game, very nice attack, starting with the move knight c to b4 by Anish Giri. However, if you're looking at the opening from a theoretical standpoint, I really don't think that how Sasha played this game was bad at all for white. And so I would say that it has to be looked at a little bit further. So you don't want to judge the game by the result only. So yeah, with that, Anish Giri moves on to the semifinal, where he will face Jan Nepomniachtchi in a couple of days, I believe. And so it should be a very interesting match as well. And yeah, so thanks for joining me for today's game of the day, and I will see you all tomorrow.